Good morning, my beautiful lovelies, and welcome back to my channel. I'm the Black Widow, and today we're going to be talking about something very important. We're basically going to be doing a reaction video to ITV's new show called Britain's Tiger Kings. We're obviously not going to watch a whole episode because it's 60 minutes, but I want to focus specifically on, I think it's about a 5 to 8 minute clip of a man who owns exotic animals, reptiles in particular. We're going to talk about how this show has impacted and how it is going to negatively impact the hobby and why, because there are some things on there that are just awful. I would say go and watch it for yourself, but I don't want to give this more publicity than it's already going to get, being on ITV, one of the sort of top channels that people go and watch their documentaries. So we're going to have a rundown about keeping exotic animals, care, husbandry, all the things that come with keeping an exotic animal. We're going to use my reptiles for reference. So you will see some of my reptiles. We're going to feed some of them while we talk about this. I've got 2 snakes, an Aki monitor, a bearded dragon, and I'm also going to talk to you about a very, very new and very special exotic that I have coming next weekend, so Saturday the 17th of September. It's been a long time coming. It's quite a large animal. Well, at the moment it's a baby, but it will be a large animal, and I want to just talk about that a little bit in regards to this show, because this gentleman that I'm going to be showing you keeps something very similar to what I will be getting, and I want to explain to you why what he is doing is wrong. I don't like coming for people in this hobby. I don't like being judgmental. But when it's something as big as this that's exposed to the public, we have to question, is this what we want people to see? Is this who we want as a reflection of this hobby? We're fighting all the time to be able to keep these amazing exotic animals. There are people out there, organisations that are desperately trying to ban certain animals from being kept in captivity. And to a degree, when they see shows like this, I don't blame them for wanting to do that, because if this is a representation of the exotic community, then I can fully understand why. But what I want to do is try and show what a real hobbyist, someone who's passionate about the animals, what that looks like. I'm by no means an experienced keeper. There are many other experienced keepers. I am learning every day, but I keep my animals pretty well. I pride myself on that because it's my passion. It's what I love. Any money that I ever might earn in the future, because let's not forget, people saying, oh, well, it's all about the money. If I ever earn money from this platform, all that money would go into caring for my animals, making their enclosures bigger and better and bolder. And I would also donate. I would donate to specific charities for rescuing animals. So, my money would go back into the hobby. I'm not the kind of person that cares about fancy cars and fancy TVs and fancy holidays. I'm a bit of a hermit. I like to be in my house with my animals. So we're not actually going to talk about the sort of financial side of things when it comes to keeping reptiles. We're going to talk specifically about care and education and why this program failed massively on that aspect. So I will stop rambling. I am going to get the episode up, and I'm going to fast forward it to the part that we're going to be taking a look at. And then we're going to stop at intervals and talk specifically about what concerns me, what is concerning others. I've spoken to many in the reptile hobby, and this is big and bad news for the hobby right now. So yeah, we're just going to have a rundown of that. So I hope you guys really enjoy. If you like the content, do subscribe, leave me a comment down below. I love to hear from you guys. And yeah, let's just get into this. Okay, so the way that I'm actually going to do this is I'm basically going to play the video, turn you to the screen, let you have a look, and then I will pause at intervals and explain some of the issues that I see with this kind of keeping. Now remember, this is someone that's representing our hobby right now. None of the rest of us have been asked to have this opportunity. This is the person that's representing our hobby. So just bear that in mind when we as we watch this. This is probably going to be a fairly long video. This part of this episode is about 10 minutes long, and we're going to be talking during it. And also stick around at the end, because I'm going to show you some of my reptiles, and I'm also going to tell you how you can go about getting your own exotic animal the right way, and things that you need to consider before you get them. But that'll be later on in the video. So for now, let's just watch this, and yeah, you guys can decide for yourself. This is Gary, not the snake, the gentleman.
This one's a honey blast reticulated python, and if you look down there in the back, you've got a 10-foot tiger reticulated python as well, female.
Okay, so to start with, he says that he's got 2 in that enclosure. Now, anyone who keeps snakes and who knows about snakes, you shouldn't house 2 together unless you're breeding. He doesn't say whether or not he's breeding in this video. I suspect he probably is. I don't like to judge, but people like this do tend to keep for profit rather than passion. So a few things that is wrong with keeping snakes together is, 1, aggression. So, for example, when you're feeding one and then feeding another, that's going to be quite a difficult thing to do when you've got 2 snakes that can smell and seek out that heat from that prey item that you're putting in there. This could cause aggression towards each other, especially if one finishes their prey first and then the second one can still smell prey in the enclosure. And, you know, it's not unheard of for a snake to consume another snake because of feeding in an enclosure that houses 2 animals. It's not super common, but it does happen. I don't know enough about reticulated pythons to say whether or not that would be something that could happen, but I do suspect that keeping 2 very large snakes in an enclosure together is not great. Secondly, this enclosure looks about 8 foot. Obviously, I cannot tell you the exact measurements of this enclosure, but an 8-foot enclosure that looks no more than 2 foot in height is not appropriately sized for 2 very large reticulated pythons. And both these reticulated pythons look as if they're about 8 foot each. Again, I cannot measure them, but they look like fairly decent sized animals. So keeping 2 in an 8-foot enclosure when they're 8 foot each, that is not going to be enough space. This could also cause the snakes to be fairly defensive towards the keeper because they've got nowhere to hide. There's no space, there's no room to move. And this is, you know, this could cause aggression from, aggression from these snakes. And snakes can be defensive naturally anyway, but this kind of makes it worse, in my opinion.
Gary wasn't a tiger or no more. Oh my word. There was snake.
Okay, I want to stop here because that is a very poorly snake. This, look at its mouth here. I'll see if I can get you a bit closer. You see how its mouth is gaping open here? This tells me that this snake probably has something like a infection in its lungs, what we call an RI infection, a respiratory infection. Now, I have had snakes that have had that before. I had a Burmese python that I kept years ago. I will insert a picture just here so you can see my beloved Henry. He got very, very large. He had a respiratory infection when he was fairly young. I'm not really sure what caused it because I do make sure to check my temperatures and things. It was very minor and dealt with very quickly and fairly inexpensively. This looks incredibly, incredibly poorly. Its mouth is gaping open. It also could be mouth rot from being kept in too humid of an environment. But this snake needs to see a vet. I would not feel proud being on ITV showing this animal. So I don't know whether he's brave or stupid for doing that, because that is a sick, sick snake. And judging by the enclosure, it's not being kept in an appropriately sized enclosure. I have no idea about his heating sources and whether he used thermostats, but this is poorly and this snake needs to see a vet. This is bad care. If your snake looks like that and you cannot explain why and show proof of the veterinary process that you've gone through to make this snake better, this is bad. Bad care all around.
That's 12.5 foot, and the normal, the lighter one is about 10.5 foot.
It's really big though, isn't it?
It goes all the way to the walls on both sides.
Gary, is that enough space for them?
Oh yeah. People think you need loads and loads of space for big snakes. You don't.
Gary, come on. You are representing our hobby here, something that you say you're passionate about, and you just said the words. People think that if you keep big snakes, they need big enclosures. They don't. What logic is that? That is absolutely not true. And anybody who is watching this, do not take that as gospel. That is totally inaccurate. Large snakes need large enclosures. Large animals need large enclosures. Most small animals need a fairly sufficient sized enclosure. Nothing wants to be contained in a tiny box. That is just not practical. It's not fair on the animal. As you saw, he was housing a beautiful big, what looked like an albino Burmese python. I have a Burmese python myself, and I've kept a Burmese python in the past. They are wonderful, wonderful animals. They actually do make really good pets if you know what you're doing with a large animal, because in nature, their nature is fairly docile. But what he said there was just absolutely ridiculous. You cannot say large animals don't need large enclosures. You are representing this hobby. You are the one that people are going to see and might think to themselves, oh, I can just go out and get myself a 10-foot snake and I only need to keep it in a 4-foot enclosure because Gary said that large snakes don't need large enclosures. No, that is not accurate. And the reason why is 1, they need space to move. 2, snakes and reptiles need a heat gradient. So you need to have a hot spot and a cool spot with a gradient that goes between the two. Because snakes thermoregulate, they cannot regulate their body temperature, And so what they need to do is they have to go and sit out in a basking spot, and then when they get too hot, they move to a cooler side. And you need that for your snake to be healthy, or reptile for that matter. The problem with keeping in a small enclosure a very large animal is you are not going to get that gradient. It's not going to be possible because in a small enclosure, let's say an enclosure is this size and you've got the heat spot here and the end of the enclosure is here and the snake is taking up that entire space. You are not going to be giving a gradient enough for that animal to not be sick, which could be one of the reasons why his boa constrictor looks incredibly poorly. So absolute rubbish coming from Gary's mouth right now.
I've been doing it a long time. Touch it. Touch the teeth. No. Wait,
I'm fine, thank you.
just like...
Okay, what he's doing here is utterly ridiculous. There is absolutely no reason to hold that snake like that, particularly just to have someone touch its teeth. That's not something that you need to do. Why is that something that he's asking this presenter, Ross, to do? This is causing unnecessary stress to this animal. That's why it has its mouth open. He was just handling it perfectly fine a minute ago, so this snake is not overly aggressive. And again, I don't think you should ever hold an animal like this unless it's absolutely necessary for something like veterinary treatment or something that you need to put in its mouth, which shouldn't really be very often unless it's a particular medicine. But I'm pretty sure for treating RI infections, it's just an injection anyway that goes under the scales. So there's absolutely no reason to do this. This is causing the animal distress for no reason whatsoever. He's trying to get Ross to touch its teeth. For what purpose? Why does he need to do that? I don't understand. This seems like showing off to me. This is proper showing off. Look at me. Look what I can do with my animals. I'm cool. And a real keeper would never do this. I would never pull out my snake, pinch it by the head, and then ask one of my friends to touch its teeth. Bad form, Gary. Bad form.
Just see how sharp they are. Can't shut his mouth because I've got my fingers there.
Yeah, clearly it can't shut its mouth because your fingers are there. Stupid. Another thing that I have noticed, all of his enclosures lack enrichment. There is absolutely no enrichment in those enclosures. They're bare. They've just got a snake, maybe one hide, and that's it. Nothing else. Now, these enclosures, okay, these enclosures are large. I'll give him that. They're large and they're arboreal, but that is still, I would say, not enough ground space. Look at how it's taking up the entire floor. I see what he's done here, that he's tried to make a bit of an effort with these large wardrobe-like enclosures. But this doesn't really matter. Retics do and will climb, but they won't all do that. A lot of them will spend the majority of the time down on the ground like this one is right now. So that arboreal space is going to be useless, absolutely useless, particularly if you house something like a Burmese python in there. So that is not enough space. And this snake is going to get bigger, okay? This snake is going to get much larger, and already it's taking up the entire of the floor space. This is not big enough. What we're going to see now is Gary taking his monitor lizard out for a walk. Yeah.
Banning him from walking Thor in the city's parks, and was now keen to take advantage of his lizard's restored freedom.
Does he like getting here, does he?
Yeah. Come on, mate.
Oh, he's off. What do you say about people who say it's...
Okay, this monitor is not a dog. It is not a domesticated animal. I don't care how hard you have worked with it. I don't care how tame you might believe it to be. This monitor is not a dog. It should not be being on a leash and being taken for a walk for a variety of different reasons. One, health and safety to the public. This might be a very tame monitor, but a small child could very easily run over and try to pet this animal, and we just don't know how this animal would react. It's in an environment that it's not used to. It's out in the open. It's not going to feel like it has anywhere to run to because, let's face it, he's also got it on a dog leash. So it could very easily lash out, whether it be a bite, a tail whip, or anything. Secondly, this animal has been domesticated in the sense that it is living in captivity. It doesn't make it a domesticated animal, but it is living in captivity. We don't know what kind of harm it could do being out and walking around like this in a forested area. You know, the bacterias, viruses, whatever there could be that is out there. Not to mention things that it could pick up and eat could be very harmful to this animal. This animal has been in what I'm assuming is a small enclosure for the majority of its life with certain heat sources. Again, I'm just assuming. So taking it out in the open like this is very dangerous for the public as well. Monitors can do a lot of damage. They've got very powerful bite force. They've got very big teeth. Their claws, or would you call them claws? Their nails are really long and sharp. And they also tail whip in defense, which I think you're going to see here shortly.
To have him on a leash, or it's cruel to have him in a bedroom. He should be in the wild.
The habitats, it's just shrinking so vast, and if we ain't got them, people aren't to actually care about them, they're just going to get extinct sooner or later, and people are just going to see them on pictures and stuff like that.
What about if you could get him, say, to a sanctuary where he had permanent heat and there were other lizards? Would you do that? Would you send him there?
If I won the lottery, I'd have a massive enclosure for all my animals. No, don't. Ow!
See, he hit you there, didn't he?
Like other wild animal owners I've met,
See,
it
he's
seemed
whipping.
that Gary wouldn't consider sending his pets to a sanctuary that replicated their natural.
So in that particular part of it, the monitor lizard is looking stressed and defensive. It's lifting its tail, it's whipping Gary. This is not a happy monitor right now. It doesn't like where it is. It doesn't like its situation, and it's being defensive. This is what I mean by it being dangerous to the public going out. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty certain that you need some kind of insurance to take an exotic animal out in public in case of a situation like a bite. I know that zoos and things in America that have handling areas have to have insurance sort of thing for that kind of thing. So I don't know whether what he's doing here is legal. Again, I don't know the ins and outs on that kind of stuff because I don't take my exotic animals outside. It's just not something that I do. But yeah, this is not a happy lizard. He should not be out here. I do agree with Gary in the sense of that he's saying that the reason why we keep exotic animals is because of their habitats being destroyed and that we want to preserve them and keep them so that if anything ever went extinct, at least we still have some in captivity. The problem is with that is I think the right sort of people should keep these kind of animals. These are large animals. They need a lot of care, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Yeah, I'm just not sure that Gary's the right person to be caring for these very large and very amazing animals. Okay, so that concludes this part of the video. Basically, the overall feel that I got for this episode was basically witnessing animals in way too small enclosures, animals living in enclosures with other animals, not enough space, not enough enrichment, there's no climbing ability, there's no extras in their enclosure to afford them enrichment, very irresponsible care, taking animals out in public where they could potentially be dangerous to the public, especially young children that tend to run over and touch things without really thinking. Taking his monitor lizard out on a leash like it's some kind of dog. Yeah, all around, this is not what we want representing our hobby. My opinion is that if you want to keep large animals, fine, keep 1 or 2 large animals so that you can have large enclosures. But what he should be doing here, he's got 40 plus animals. If he sold over half of those animals, he could use that money to improve his care and buy or build some very large enclosures for some of the awesome animals that he does have. This is not someone we want to represent our hobby at all. This is not what a proper keeper looks like. This, to me, is a hoarder. Someone who just has animals for the sake of it. He likes them. He obviously likes them because he cares for them. I think it makes him feel unique and different. But if he was passionate about the animals, they would not be being kept like this. I suggest you go and watch that episode yourself and make your own mind up. But I wanted to make this video to make you aware that this is not how we keep. This is not how we want to be represented. I'm really ashamed that this is who we have chosen, or not we, but ITV has chosen to reach out to. I guess because it makes more fun content, because he's got loads of animals. But there are so many other facilities that could have done this in a much better way than Gary did. So, yeah, we're now going to move on and talk about how I think you can get yourself an exotic animal and the best way to do that. As I'm going through these steps, I'm going to explain to you what I have got coming. So I'm going to do that now very quickly. So before I go into step 1, I am going to be getting a savannah monitor, a baby savannah monitor, the weekend coming. So Saturday the 17th of April, and I'm incredibly excited. Step 1, which you're going to see in a minute, explains about research, and I want to explain, before I explain that step, is that I did research for an entire year before I decided to get a monitor, because monitors are big, they can be dangerous, they require a lot of care, and I have never owned a very large lizard before. I have a bearded dragon and an Aki monitor that you will see shortly. And this was the next step for me. I've owned large constrictors, large snakes, so I'm very comfortable with large animals. But I want people to understand that I have done a lot of research. I've reached out to a lot of keepers. I have a friend called David who I talk to who has kept large animals for a very long time. So not only have I done my research, I did it for a year. I looked into what would probably be the best monitor for me based on how I feel I can provide its care. And I've spoken to keepers who are good at what they do to ask advice. You know, do they think I'm ready, seeing as they know me as a person? And they are also there to support me. There's nothing wrong with having other keepers behind you to support you. So that if you ever come up with any issues with keeping that particular reptile, you have people that can help you in those situations. So that's something very exciting that I've got coming. And now we're going to move on to step 1. Okay, so I have a couple of steps before you get yourself an exotic. Step 1, and this is an absolute must. Before you decide to go out and buy an animal, you must research. And what I mean by research is not just Google, because Google can give a host of different answers from a host of different sources. I've also found that a lot of the resources online come from pet stores. And I'm not going to go too much into pet stores, but a lot of pet stores just want to sell you things, not necessarily things that you need and necessarily things that are good for that animal. What I mean by research is find a forum, a reptile or exotic forum, or Facebook, and speak to keepers, actual people that keep these animals, people that have kept these animals for a long time, because that is where you're going to get the most up-to-date, most specific care for the type of animal that you want to get. So that is my step 1. Okay, step 2 is going to be you need to get the enclosure and set up first. This is step 2. You do not go out and buy an animal before you have learned all its requirements and everything that it needs. And I'm going to show you some of the things that it needs by showing you some of the enclosures that I have and what they house. So in this enclosure here, we have my very skittish Aki monitor that's just ran off. And as you can see, we have got lots of places for it to hide. At the top here, we have a very strong UVB light, which a lot of lizards require. We also have a heat source, and you can see the cable here. We also have a thermostat that regulates this heat. This is one of the things that you need to think of before you go and get yourself an animal. What kind of environment does it need? Does it need heat? Does it need UVB? What size enclosure does this animal need? This enclosure is 3 foot by 1.5, maybe 2, and it's still a baby. Where is the little one? See if I can show you him. He's hiding and not overly happy with me, so I'm not going to be able to show him to you. But this isn't going to be its permanent home, because as this Aki monitor grows, it's going to need an enclosure, something very similar to what I have down here. In here is my bearded dragon enclosure, and you can see the size difference between these enclosures. And that is because eventually the Aki monitor is going to need something as large as this. In here we house my beautiful bearded dragon Beatrix, and as you can see, we've got another UVB light here, and we've also got its heat source with the probe that's over there in the corner sticking out from that hole. Bearded dragons need lots of things to climb on. As you can see, I've got this great big piece of branching here that goes all the way across, lots of different things, the right kind of substrate for it. You need to think about food, etc. So these are things that you have to acquire before you go and get an animal. This enclosure here houses my baby boa constrictor, which is just here in its hide. So as you can see, I've got a hide in the cool spot over here, and it's got a hide over here in the hot spot. Again, it's got its heating with the guards to make sure the snake can't burn itself. And under here we have the probe. And again, some enrichment, the things for it to climb on. Water is an essential. So yeah, these are all the kind of things that you need to make sure that you get before you actually get yourself an animal. Step 3. What kind of food does it eat, and how are you going to acquire it and afford it? So for example, the monitor that I have coming is going to be predominantly insect fed. It can eat things like small quail eggs and meat and things, but it's really not good for their liver and their overall health to do that. So I decided to go and set up a breeding colony of roaches. And they're all hiding in these egg crates. And the reason why I have done this is because it is super expensive if you have to buy over 300 crickets, or locusts or roaches. Anything that the animal is going to consume is going to be expensive, especially if you have an animal like I've got coming that might eat 150, 200 roaches or insects every month, maybe more. The cheapest and effective way to do that is to potentially set up your own breeding colony, because otherwise it is going to be very expensive and you cannot run out of food for these kind of animals, because that would be really bad for their health. They need quite a lot of food. And you also have to remember that a lot of these animals are also going to require calcium dust. So, you can buy that from pet shops or anywhere else. And this is really essential to a lot of lizards in particular, because they need it for their bones and their growth and their health. So again, you really need to think about whether or not this is something you can afford to do, and look into potentially setting up something like this so that you've got a consistent source of food. And obviously the next step would be acquiring the animal. I would say to look out at, there are plenty of rescue reptile centres that take in baby exotics from all over. I do not really recommend going to a pet store unless it's a pet store that knows about exotics and keeping those kind of things, because pet stores tend to have very limited knowledge on care. Reach out to other keepers, find a reputable breeder. Don't just go and buy one because it's the first one you have found, because the last thing you want to do is to be bringing in a sick animal into your house. And that leads me on to my last and final point, which is quarantine. Okay, so quarantine is incredibly important if you already keep a vast variety of reptiles, because when you get this animal, you don't know whether or not this animal is going to be sick. So I always quarantine. So in here, we have my baby Burmese python, and this is not a setup that I enjoy. As you can see, these are the kind of setups that I like. But sometimes this really is absolutely necessary, because here's my baby Burm. Hello, darling. It recently ate, so I'm not going to disturb it too much, and I'll put its hide back in a second. So the reason why I recommend quarantine, and what I mean by quarantine, is but a tub that's appropriately sized for the animal. You still need to provide it a heat source and a thermostat, which I do with all of my quarantine animals. But I tend to use things like paper toweling, or what I also like to use is puppy pads, because it means that if anything like mites was to appear, it's much easier to spot on something like that versus on soil and substrate for animals, because it's darker, so you won't be able to see them. It allows you to see the animal's fecal matter to make sure that everything is healthy. It just allows you to see that animal in a sterile environment so that if any issues pop up, you can deal with them. If you were to just put this animal in a standard enclosure and you're not washing your hands between handling, you could potentially take whatever that animal has and pass it on to your other reptiles, which could be very, very dangerous. So I always quarantine anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending on the animal, depending on whether or not I notice any issues. So that is an absolute must. Okay, so I hope you guys really enjoyed this video, something a little bit different. Let me know down below if you think that there's anything in particular that I've missed. I really hope that there isn't, but I'm sure there are a variety of things that I've missed. But yeah, let's just remember that keeping these animals is a luxury. It's not something that, we demand to have. It's not within our rights to keep these animals and to not care for them properly. Do your research, set the enclosures up, look after the animal, make sure you can feed and provide for that animal appropriately. Represent the hobby well. If you can't afford to get a large enclosure, then I'm sorry, but you can't afford to have that animal. I have this room, my living room, this back wall here that's sat behind me. This is about a 15-foot wall here. So those large snakes that I've got, the boa constrictor, the Burmese python, those are going to be the only large snakes that I'm able to keep, along with the monitor lizard that I've got coming, because I already know that I can fit the space that I need on these walls. I have a 15-foot wall here. I have a 12-foot wall over there. I've got plenty of space in this living room to provide very large enclosures, and that's exactly what I will be doing. These enclosures are expensive. You know, you're talking 500 quid upwards, based depending on the size that you need. So you have to really think before you get an exotic animal, whether or not you can house it, how much it's going to cost you, what space do you need, what heating and lighting sources do you need. You really have to think about these things, because you don't have the right to go and purchase an animal and abuse it. And what I mean by abuse is giving it inadequate space, no heating or lighting sources, not the appropriate food. I know plenty of people that keep monitor lizards and simply just feed mice and rodents and things. That's not always going to be healthy for certain lizards. You have to do your research, and the best research you can do is talking to other keepers. I cannot stress that enough. Talk to other keepers, get support from other keepers, find out if they think you're prepared, you know, put forth your plan for what you want to get and how you know what you're doing is the right thing to do before you just go out and buy an animal, because too often I see abused, neglected animals that are all over the selling pages that just look absolutely awful, and you don't want to buy yourself an unhealthy reptile. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this very long video. Do thumbs it up, comment something down below, let me know what you guys thought, let me know what your opinions are of this ITV program, and yeah, I'll see you guys again next time.